Welcome to MacroBioBoi's Mr. Clean crossover. Yes, I know my shirt is too white. I'm sorry, it's too hot in the studio right now and I had to remove my sweater. Now that we're done addressing the weirdness of my white shirt, let's talk about the fact that I was dead right when I put Infinimist all the way up to S tier for Season 2 from speculation. And now that I've built it out, this thing absolutely shreds. I was accidentally doing tier 100 nightmare dungeons without realizing, and I'll just let the footage play while I continue to yammer at you about how good this build is and some of the innovations I'm bringing to it so that you can shore up its only weakness, which is boss kill speed. So walking into the season, the one thing that I had my eyes on was X-Falls Ring. X-Falls is absolutely nutty because it says your damage over time abilities have a 50% chance to proc a massive amount of shadow damage that explodes. Playing with this thing, even in tier 100 nightmare dungeons, feels like I'm walking around with the Barber Heart from season 1. When everything gets brought into a small area with corpse tendrils, I lay on a couple corpse explosions, and then everybody pops instantaneously. The damage output from this single ring is absolutely nutty. And luckily enough, this ring also helps to shore up our weakest point, which was the boss kill speed. In fact, there are a couple changes to your vampiric powers, a couple inclusions of unique items, and even removing Howl from Below, which can go even further to make it so that you are consistently outputting massive crit procs from this build. But during a single Duriel kill, I just crit for 4 million damage while doing damage over time. Now, I understand that a lot of builds do millions of damage, but I'll let you know, Infinimist never used to crit for millions, and now it just does. And walking out of season 1 with the Barber Heart, I didn't think I was going to see those types of numbers ever again. But it turns out that X-Falls Ring's base damage is so high that being able to multiply it by Blighted, and then Flesh Eater, and then Fueled by Death, and then adding on additional damage sources like that are just making this thing go absolutely through the roof, along with the consistent damage over time that you're already expecting from the build. Not only that, mobility on the build has only gotten stronger since we can proactively use Metamorphosis for better evade, which also gives us more access to Unstoppable, which means that Ghostwalker on our boots is adding on even more total uptime of near max cap movement speed. It means that with Ghostwalker up, after you evade, you can have about 177 total movement speed just from your amulet, your boots, and the aspect. And let's talk about survivability. Survivability on this build is so great that I'm actually now using Tybalt's Will, which I'll go over in the bossing section. But this thing effectively says no damage reduction stats except for a single affix, and you can just drop it onto the build in clear tier 100s because of how consistently we're able to proc our cooldowns, stay in Blood Mist, keep Bone Storm up, even without having to do anything silly like use Flicker Step and Lidless Wall, which I have tested out. I think like absolutely trash. Do not use Flicker Step on this build. Don't use Black River on this build either. A lot of people were asking me Black River, Flicker Step, Lidless Wall. Lidless Wall is fine for speed farming. Everything else I just mentioned, literally don't use it on this build. It's just bad. All right, but now that you've gotten your fill of gameplay, let's go ahead and look at what I think is probably the most important thing for people to walk away with, which is the new bossing spec for the build. Because I've already updated all the build planners, the guide is already updated. The only other thing I really need to work on is Infinimist plus Mendeln, which is probably going to be another day or two before I can put the gear together and actually get that fully tested. But let's talk about boss killing, because this is definitely the thing that most people are concerned about with the build, and the thing that I've worked the hardest to shore up all those inconsistencies to at least give you a much more pleasant bossing experience. So for people who haven't seen it yet in the Discord, which obviously there's a link to everything down below, we are maintaining all of our build guides in planners, and these are directly linking to the Maxwell guides as well. So you can come check it out through here if you don't want to keep the homepage favorited, which you absolutely should. Maxwell's obviously the best website. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, but hey, I work there, right? But we're maintaining everything in the Discord now as well, so the moment that it gets updated here, I automatically change the planners. So if you're looking for that more often, you can go ahead and find it here. This is where I'm also housing the Shadow Surfer, which you've probably seen way too many videos from me about, and eventually I'll get that into a Maxwell official guide, but it's right here as well. Now let's actually go into the planner, because I want to show you a few of the other things that you really need to keep in mind for the bossing setup. In the bossing setup, one of the biggest changes here is that we're obviously dropping Howl from Below. Now Howl from Below is good to make your corpse explosion damage do more damage, but that's not really important, and obviously it's not going to attribute to a lot of additional kill speed. What's really increasing our overall kill speed here is X-Falls. So the reason why we need to build around X-Falls is because it's something that can crit. Just like our Shadow Blight, which was basically the one critical source of damage other than Bone Storm to a lesser degree, X falls is a huge amount of damage, which can crit and hit the target. Because of that, we want to have as much base crit chance as we possibly can, and then we're going to swap out a vampiric power as well. So just to very quickly touch on it, being able to put additional crit chance onto our gloves and grasping veins means that we're gaining 32% chance to crit here. We have the 20% chance to crit from Bone Storm. You should already have crit chance on your ring if you're building it according to the planner. And what that means altogether is that before grasping veins and Bone Storm, we're sitting at basically 42% chance to crit. With them up, we're at 82% chance to crit. And then the piece de resistance, the cherry on top, is it turns out that there's actually a phenomenal little vampire power that you can use as well. Terror might not have seemed like something that was incredibly important to look at, because it says when you are struck, you have a chance to fear an enemy. And then when an enemy is feared, you have 100% chance to crit against them. Now, Howl from Below is something that actually applies fear. So you might go, well, why would you drop this at all? Why would you do that? Let's think about what causes the feared effect. Getting hit, triggering off of lucky hit when you have Howl from Below on, and when you stagger the boss. Staggering a boss applies all types of crowd control. They are feared, chilled, frozen. They have every single thing on them, which then can activate every single aspect, affix, or conditional modifier that says when X is in play. So this one vampiric power says that the moment that you stagger a boss, you have 100% chance to crit against them. That means that Shadow Blight, Bone Storm, and most importantly X Falls will crit every single time that they activate. The moment that you apply the stagger effect, your damage goes through the roof. So it's kind of nutty, this interaction with this one vampire power here, but we definitely want to make sure that we're critting as often as possible outside of stagger, because the boss spends roughly half of the combat being staggered and half of the combat out of stagger. So you don't want to be missing out on a lot of this damage, and that's why we're going to swap out to here. Obviously, we're still using Tibalts. We don't change really anything else about the build. I have moved crit chance onto the offhand as opposed to the additional intelligence. Now, you still want all your lucky hit. You still want all your lucky hit with barrier. You want to be triggering lucky hit as often as possible, but it's this big crit chance and the 100% chance to crit that really changes the Infinimist's identity as just a density speed farmer into a pretty decent boss killer as well. Now, it's not all of a sudden just going to make it so that this thing is performing at the same level of Bone Spear. I would say we took our boss killing ability from, not joking here, maybe F tier, and bumped it up to a high C tier. Now, you might say C tier, why the hell would I care about a C tier boss killer? Well, you're using an S tier survivability, S tier power farmer, S tier speed farmer. And now you've taken its worst attribute, an F tier boss kill speed, and bumped it up to high average, mid average. That's a pretty significant increase in the overall output of this build. And it's really going to help shore up some of the issues that people have when they go, I love the build, I love playing it, I love moving around on it. The moment I get to a boss, I want to tear out my hair. I have completely gone from hating running any nightmare dungeons that have a boss at the end, especially tier 100s, where those guys just have a ridiculous amount of health now that they've buffed it up, and made it into a pretty enjoyable experience. I'm not auto-salvaging things with hard to kill bosses. I kind of just go in and spank them and not really worry about the consequences. Now, I did also want to very quickly touch on the speed farming setup for this build, the one that's using Lidless Wall. I do think that for speed farming, the Lidless Wall continues to be a really good tool. I went and tested out every combination of all of the other uniques, the Godslayer helmet, Tibalts, Black River, Lidless Wall. I think that Lidless Wall is the only one that really makes the cut here for speed farming. I think you can also toss on Tibalt's Will over here. You just need to make sure to move Shielding Storm up onto your armor. So maybe just leave it on your armor in general, so you can kind of just have it there. But a lot of people have been asking me, one specifically about Soulbrand. Soulbrand is a kind of an interesting inclusion on the build. It does have 2 defensive stats, so maximum life and damage reduction from close. And then basically what it says is you can accidentally waste all of your potions to gain a barrier. And then also you have lucky hit chance with barrier. So the question really becomes, do I want Soulbrand to give me 10% lucky hit chance with barrier? And I already hear what you're saying. Mac, you missed a part. When you have barrier, you have 20% damage reduction. That's insane. That's so much damage reduction. Look at my chess piece right now. Do you notice it? Do you notice it at all? Soulbrand gives you a damage reduction from close enemies. That's something that you can already have on this build. It will give you 20% damage reduction once you have barrier active, meaning that when you lose barrier, you lose that damage reduction. Not a big problem, but sometimes it happens. You can already have close to 20% damage reduction when you have affected shadow damage onto a target. So for all intents and purposes, I think that the amount of damage reduction that you gain washes out, and then you end up missing out on a maximum armor roll. And it turns out that maximum armor, pretty important in Season 2. The physical damage reduction from armor is nothing to sneeze at, and the fact that we now need to juggle resistances as well does mean that it can be harder to max out all of your survivability stats, and I like to make sure that I'm at minimum 10k armor before disobedience is even in play, and while doing that, I feel incredibly safe. So really the question comes down to, do I think I need 10% more lucky hit chance while I have barrier active? Or do I want to be able to run Disobedience, or do I want to be able to run Shielding Storm? And at that point, I just don't think that Soulbrand actually brings enough to the table. There we go. There's our update to Infinimist. I'm very confident in where I've placed it into the S tier. It is crazy good at speed farming. It's crazy good at running Nightmare Dungeons. It is now bumped up to a pretty solid boss killer as well. Not outperforming the crazy one-shots that you see in game. Obviously, I don't think we should really be caring about those as far as like how a build truly functions. They're definitely very cool. Don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on them. They're super sick. But when we're talking about like evaluating a build, you can't be looking at these like massive outliers, right? But there you go. There's Infinimist. Like I said, the build planners are all updated. I'm going to finally work on Infinimist in Mendeln as well, but I just want to get this out to people because I know a lot of people have been waiting for the update on Infinimist. They've been looking for a lot of guidance on how to play the build better, on how to incorporate the new items that have dropped during this season, and I just want to get all that insight out to you. As always, if you think I could have explained something better, you have a better setup, you have a recommendation, or you had more questions, please let me know down in the comments below. It's one of the best ways for you to get those questions directly to me. Also consider joining the Discord, which is also linked down below. And as always, if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to bring like this level of quality to every single build guide and every single thing that I put out. So you may notice I put out a few less build guides and a few less videos than your average content creator, just because I kind of put a sick amount of research into these things. So if you appreciate that level of detail, hit the subscribe button, throw a like onto the video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I truly hope that it helps, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.